Dr. Sarah Mitchell saves lives daily in her free clinic. But when a greedy pharmaceutical CEO raises insulin prices by 400%, her patients start dying in silence. Their screams go unheard, until one brave doctor decides to fight back, risking everything to expose the deadly truth. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The rain hammered against the tin roof of the small clinic as Dr. Sarah Mitchell pressed her stethoscope against the chest of 7-year-old Maya. The little girl's breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle that made Sarah's heart clench with familiar pain. Maya's small body shook with each cough, her lips turning slightly blue from the lack of oxygen. "How long has she been like this?" Sarah asked Maya's mother, who clutched a faded dupatta around her shoulders. The woman's clothes were soaked from the rain, and her feet were bare and muddy. 3 days, Dr. Sahiba. But we had no money for the bus fare to come here sooner. The woman's voice cracked with guilt. I walked here today because I was afraid she would die. Sarah felt rage bubble in her chest. Not at this mother, never at the mothers who came to her free clinic in the slums of Karachi. Her anger was reserved for the men in air-conditioned offices who had made this suffering inevitable. The men who decided that profit mattered more than the life of a 7-year-old girl struggling to breathe. Maya needed an inhaler. A simple device that cost less than a fancy dinner at the restaurants where rich people ate. The medicine inside it cost even less to make, just a few rupees. But for families like Maya's, where the father worked as a day laborer earning barely enough to buy bread, it might as well have cost 1,000,000 rupees. I'll give you the medicine, Sarah said softly, touching the mother's trembling hand. And I'll give you 3 inhalers to take home. You come back if she gets worse, understand? Day or night. I don't care what time it is. You bring her to me. Tears streamed down the woman's face. She tried to kiss Sarah's hands, but Sarah pulled away gently. Dr. Sahiba, how can we ever repay you? We have nothing. By keeping your daughter alive, Sarah interrupted. That's payment enough. The woman nodded, clutching the inhalers like they were made of gold. Sarah watched them leave, Maya's small hand in her mother's, and felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle on her shoulders. She saved lives one at a time, but the system that endangered those lives remained unchanged. As the mother and daughter disappeared into the rain, Sarah's assistant Zara entered the room, her face pale and hands shaking. Zara was young, only 25, fresh out of nursing school with ideals that hadn't yet been crushed by reality. Dr. Sarah, you need to see this right now. Zara held out her phone with trembling fingers. The news headline made Sarah's blood freeze. Pharmaceutical giant Medicorp raises insulin prices by 400%. Thousands of diabetic patients unable to afford life-saving medication. Below it was a photo of Robert Chen, CEO of Medicorp International, smiling at a charity gala. He wore an expensive tuxedo and held a glass of champagne. The same man who had once promised to change the world alongside Sarah when they were medical students together 20 years ago. The same man who had sworn he would dedicate his life to helping the poor and sick. Sarah's hands shook as she read the article. Diabetic patients across the country were rationing their insulin. Some were taking half their prescribed doses to make their medicine last longer. Others were skipping doses entirely. 3 people had already died in the past week alone. Many more were in hospitals with dangerous complications. Market forces dictate pricing, Robert had told the reporter with a shrug. We're a business, not a charity. If people can't afford our products, they should have made better life choices. The words cut through Sarah like a scalpel slicing open flesh. She remembered their final conversation 15 years ago, before Robert left medicine to join the pharmaceutical industry. They had been having coffee in a small cafe near the hospital where they both worked. I can do more good from the inside, Sarah, he had said, leaning forward eagerly. Think about it. As a doctor, I can help maybe 50 patients a day. But from inside a pharmaceutical company, I can help millions. I can make sure drugs are affordable. I can push for research into diseases that affect poor people, not just rich ones. I can change the system from within. Sarah had been skeptical even then. The system changes people, Robert. Not the other way around. Once you're in that world of money and power, it's hard to remember why you entered medicine in the first place. I won't forget, Robert had promised, his voice full of conviction. I'll always remember that we became doctors to save lives, not to make money. Trust me, Sarah. I'll never become like them. But the system had changed him instead. Or maybe it had just revealed who he really was underneath the idealistic words and noble promises. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the small apartment of Mr. Khalid Ahmed, a retired teacher who had been her patient for 5 years. His daughter Amina, a 22-year-old college student, was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor beside his bed. "He's gone, doctor. Baba is gone. I tried to wake him this morning for breakfast and he wouldn't wake up. He was cold. So cold." Sarah knelt beside Khalid's body, though she knew she was too late. She had been too late for hours. His insulin pen lay empty on the bedside table, the last drop used up 3 days ago. Next to it was a small notebook where he had been carefully rationing his doses, stretching 1 month's supply across 3 months, then 4 months, then even longer. The careful handwriting showed his desperate calculations: if I take half dose in morning only, medicine will last 60 more days. If I skip weekends, 75 days, must make it to Amina's graduation. He kept saying the medicine was too expensive. Amina wept, her voice breaking. I told him I would quit college and get a job to pay for it. I begged him, Dr. Sahiba. I told him I would work 3 jobs if I had to. But he refused. He got so angry when I suggested it. He said his education was already complete but mine wasn't. He said I was going to be the first person in our family to get a university degree and he wouldn't let anything stop that. Amina grabbed Sarah's arm desperately. I should have stolen the money. I should have dropped out anyway. I should have done something. Anything. Why didn't I do something? He died because of me. Because I wanted to finish college. Sarah pulled the young woman into her arms, letting her cry. But inside, Sarah felt something break in her chest. Something that had been cracking for years finally shattered completely. This was the 14th patient she had lost to insulin rationing since Medicorp raised their prices 6 months ago. 14 souls who had chosen death over burdening their families. Khalid Ahmed had been a good man. Sarah knew this because she had treated him for 5 years and had heard countless stories from his students who still visited him. He had taught English literature at a government school for 40 years, often buying books with his own money for students who couldn't afford them. He had inspired hundreds of children to love learning. He had raised Amina alone after his wife died, working extra tuition jobs to pay for her education. And he had died alone in his small apartment because he couldn't afford medicine that cost 12 rupees to manufacture but was being sold for 400 rupees per dose. At Khalid's funeral 2 days later, Sarah stood among the mourners, watching his former students cry for a teacher who should have lived another 20 years. He should have seen Amina graduate. He should have walked her down the aisle at her wedding. He should have held his great-grandchildren and told them stories about poetry and literature. Amina stood apart from everyone, staring at her father's grave with empty eyes. She hadn't spoken since the funeral started. She just stood there, silent and hollow, as if her soul had died with her father. One of Khalid's former students, a middle-aged man in a worn suit, spoke at the funeral. Sir taught us that education was the path to dignity. He taught us to think for ourselves and question injustice. He taught us that good men stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. His voice broke. He deserved better than this. He deserved to live. But the world didn't care because he was poor. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside. She kept seeing Khalid's face in her mind. His kind smile when he came for his appointments. The way he always asked about her health before discussing his own. The pride in his voice when he talked about Amina's achievements in college. She kept seeing Maya's blue lips as she struggled to breathe. The fear in her mother's eyes. The dozens of other patients who came to her clinic every day with illnesses that should be easily treatable but weren't because they couldn't afford medicine. She thought about all the mothers who skipped meals so their children could eat. All the fathers who worked themselves to death to pay medical bills, all the grandparents who rationed their medicine so their grandchildren could have school supplies. And she thought about Robert Chen in his expensive suits, living in his mansion, flying on private jets, eating at restaurants where a single meal cost more than Khalid had spent on food in a month. Sarah opened her laptop and searched for Robert Chen's name. Within seconds, she was looking at his company's latest financial report. Medicorp had just announced record profits, $30 billion in the last quarter alone. The same quarter they raised insulin prices by 400%. The board of directors had voted to award Robert a $50 million bonus for his excellent leadership and strategic vision. $50 million, while 14 of Sarah's patients had died. While Amina sat alone in her apartment, drowning in guilt. While Maya's mother walked miles in the rain because she couldn't afford bus fare. Sarah's hands trembled on the keyboard. She clicked on Robert's social media profile. Photos of luxury vacations in Europe. A new sports car worth more than Sarah would earn in her entire lifetime. Designer suits and expensive watches. Pictures from exclusive parties where the wine cost more per bottle than most people's monthly salaries. One recent post showed him at an expensive restaurant, sitting in front of a table loaded with delicacies. The caption read, "Success is the reward for hard work and smart decisions. Never apologize for winning at life." Sarah stared at that post for a long time. At Robert's smug smile. At the expensive food that would be thrown away as waste. At the careless arrogance of a man who had forgotten what it meant to be human. Something cold and sharp crystallized in Sarah's heart. Something that felt like ice and steel and fury all mixed together. She had spent 15 years trying to save people one at a time. Treating symptoms while the disease of inequality and greed continued to spread. She had been a doctor, healing wounds without questioning why those wounds kept appearing in the first place. But maybe it was time to stop being a doctor and start being something else. Maybe it was time to cut out the cancer at its source. Sarah spent the next 6 weeks doing something she had never done before. She stopped being reactive and started being strategic. She stopped treating symptoms and started investigating the disease. She contacted former medical school classmates who worked in pharmaceutical companies. She joined online forums where patients shared their struggles with medication costs. She spent hours every night reading articles, financial reports, leaked internal documents, and investigative journalism pieces about Medicorp and other pharmaceutical giants. What she discovered made her physically ill. Medicorp's price increase wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic pattern that had been going on for years. Robert's company had been quietly buying out smaller pharmaceutical companies that produced affordable generic medicines. They would acquire these companies, then immediately shut down their generic production lines. With the affordable competition eliminated, Medicorp could charge whatever prices they wanted. They had also spent millions on lobbying governments to extend their patent protections. A drug that should have become available as a cheap generic after 10 years remained under patent for 15 or 20 years instead. During those extra years, Medicorp made billions while patients suffered. Even worse, Sarah discovered internal emails and documents showing that Medicorp had funded biased research studies designed to discredit alternative treatments. If a cheaper drug showed promise in treating diabetes or heart disease, Medicorp would fund studies specifically designed to make that drug look dangerous or ineffective. And Robert Chen was at the center of it all. Every major decision, every unethical strategy, every policy that put profits over human lives. His signature appeared on documents approving price increases. His emails showed him personally ordering the shutdown of generic production facilities. One evening, Sarah received an encrypted email from someone calling themselves Conscience. The email contained a single line: "I work for Medicorp. I have proof of everything. I want to help." Sarah arranged to meet the sender in a quiet cafe far from her usual neighborhood. The man who arrived was in his 40s, thin and nervous-looking, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. His name was David Kumar, and he had been a senior executive at Medicorp until 8 months ago. "I quit after discovering they were falsifying drug trial data," David told Sarah, his voice low and urgent. "We had a new insulin formulation that was supposed to be revolutionary. But early trials showed it caused kidney damage in some patients. Instead of stopping the trials and fixing the problem, they buried the results. They manipulated the data to make it look safe. Then they released it to the public." David pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the table. "This contains everything. Original trial data, internal emails discussing the cover-up. Financial records showing bribes paid to regulatory officials. Voice recordings from board meetings where they discussed these strategies openly." "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" Sarah asked. David laughed bitterly. "I tried. I went to the regulatory agency. But Medicorp has people there on their payroll. My complaint was buried. Then Medicorp destroyed my career. They spread rumors that I was unstable, that I had stolen company funds. They threatened my family. No one would hire me after that." His eyes met Sarah's, and she saw the same anger and pain she felt every day. "But I kept all the evidence. I knew someday someone would be brave enough to use it." Sarah took the USB drive with trembling fingers. "This could bring down the entire company." "It could," David agreed. "But you need to be careful. These people are dangerous, Dr. Mitchell. They have unlimited resources and no conscience. Once you start this fight, they'll come after you with everything they have." "I'm ready," Sarah said firmly, thinking of Khalid's empty insulin pen and Amina's hollow eyes. Over the following weeks, David provided Sarah with more documents, emails, and recordings. He introduced her to other former Medicorp employees who had witnessed unethical practices. A researcher who had been fired for refusing to falsify trial data. An accountant who had discovered financial fraud. A sales representative who had been ordered to bribe doctors into prescribing Medicorp drugs even when cheaper alternatives were available. Each person had a story of trying to do the right thing and being crushed by the system. Each person had been silenced, threatened, or destroyed professionally. But each person still had evidence. And together, their evidence painted a devastating picture of corporate corruption. Sarah compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Hundreds of pages of documents, hours of audio recordings, testimony from dozens of witnesses. Financial records proving fraud and bribery. Medical data showing Medicorp had knowingly released dangerous drugs. She had enough evidence to bring down Robert Chen and his entire corrupt empire. But Sarah knew that evidence alone wasn't enough. The legal system was slow. Lawyers could delay justice for years. And meanwhile, people would continue to die every single day. She needed something more immediate. Something that would force the world to pay attention. She needed to make this personal. Sarah requested a meeting with Robert Chen under the pretense of discussing a potential partnership between her clinic and Medicorp's charitable foundation. She claimed she wanted to apologize for her earlier accusations and work together to find solutions. To her surprise, Robert agreed immediately. His assistant called within an hour to schedule the meeting for the following week. The following Tuesday, Sarah took an elevator to the top floor of Medicorp's headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper in the heart of Karachi's business district. The offices were decorated with expensive art and marble floors. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see the entire city spread out below. You couldn't see the slums from up here. You couldn't see the poverty or the suffering. Finally, she was shown into Robert's corner office. The space was enormous. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was all expensive leather and dark wood. Robert stood up and came around his desk with an outstretched hand. Sarah Mitchell. It's been too long. You look exactly the same. Sarah didn't take his hand. She just stood there, looking at him with cold eyes. Robert's smile faded slightly. He gestured to the expensive leather chairs. Please, sit. Can I get you anything? I'm not here for refreshments, Sarah said quietly. I'm here to give you one chance to do the right thing. Robert's expression shifted from friendly to wary. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of Khalid Ahmed, a picture from his daughter's graduation. This was my patient. His name was Khalid Ahmed. He was a teacher for 40 years. She swiped to the next photo, Khalid lying dead in his bed. This is him 3 months ago. He died because he couldn't afford your insulin. He rationed his doses until his body gave up. Robert's face paled, but he didn't look away. Sarah showed him more photos. An elderly woman who had died from diabetic complications. A young father in a coma. A grandmother who had stopped taking her medicine. These are just a few of the people your decisions have killed, Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage. 14 of my patients have died in the past 3 months alone. Robert stood up, his own anger showing now. That's unfair. Insulin production is expensive. Stop lying. Sarah's voice cut through the air. She pulled out a folder and threw it on his desk. Production costs you 12 rupees per vial. You sell it for 400. You've bought out 6 generic manufacturers and shut them all down. You falsified drug trial data. You've bribed regulatory officials in 17 countries. Robert's expression shifted from anger to fear. Where did you get those documents? From people whose consciences you couldn't buy, Sarah interrupted. She pulled out a USB drive and placed it on his desk. This contains evidence of everything. The falsified trials, the bribes, the systematic destruction of generic manufacturers. The deaths you've caused. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Robert's face. I'm giving you one chance, Robert, Sarah said quietly. Reduce your prices to reasonable levels. Release your patents. Compensate the families. Or I release everything to the media, the regulators, and the police. Robert stood frozen for a long moment. Finally, his expression shifted into something cold and cruel. You always were naive, Sarah, he said softly. You think stolen documents scare me? I have armies of lawyers. I have politicians who owe me favors. I have more money than you can imagine, and I can use it to destroy you. He stepped closer. I've already started. Your clinic is closed. Your accounts are frozen. Every hospital in the city has been told not to hire you. I can make you disappear from the medical profession entirely. Robert pressed a button on his desk. If you persist, I'll do worse. Security will show you out. And if I see you near this building again, I'll have you arrested. 2 security guards appeared. Sarah picked up the USB drive slowly. You really have forgotten everything we believed in. I've become successful, Robert said coldly. I've become powerful. While you're still playing saint in some slum clinic. The difference between us, Sarah said quietly, is that I can still sleep at night. You have 48 hours, Robert. She walked out past the security guards, her hands shaking but her resolve stronger than ever. Within hours of Sarah's visit, her life began to crumble. That evening, police arrived at her apartment with a warrant for her arrest. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for possession of stolen property, corporate espionage, and extortion. Sarah spent 3 days in jail before Zara scraped together bail money. When she finally walked out, exhausted and humiliated, the media had already painted her as a criminal. Headlines screamed, "Doctor arrested for blackmail scheme," and "Clinic shut down after police discover fraud." Medicorp's public relations team had crafted the narrative perfectly. They claimed Sarah was bitter and jealous of Robert's success. They produced witnesses who said she had been unstable for years. Every journalist Sarah contacted became suddenly unavailable. News stations refused to air her story. Social media platforms kept deleting her posts. "Maybe I should give up," Sarah said 1 week later, sitting in Zara's apartment. "Robert has too much power." Zara held her hand. "Doctor, remember what you told Maya's mother? You told her that keeping her daughter alive was all that mattered." There was a knock on the door. Zara opened it to find Maya's mother with a dozen other women Sarah recognized. "Dr. Sahiba," Maya's mother said. "We heard what happened. We know the things they're saying are lies. You saved my daughter's life." Another woman stepped forward. "My son had pneumonia. Every hospital turned us away. You treated him for free. You're not a criminal. You're a hero." One by one, the women shared their stories. "We don't have much money," Maya's mother said. "But we have voices. And we'll use them to tell everyone the truth." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She had forgotten that she wasn't alone. Sarah decided to go directly to the people. She created social media accounts and posted her story, not as a doctor, but as a human being who had witnessed too much suffering. She posted photos of her patients with their families' permission. Real people with real names and real stories. She posted evidence carefully chosen to raise questions without getting her arrested again. At first, nothing happened. Her posts got a few hundred views. Then, one post was shared by a popular activist. Then by a celebrity who had lost a family member to diabetes. Then by a politician. Within 48 hours, Sarah's story had gone viral. Millions of people watched her videos where she spoke calmly about what she had witnessed. She showed documents. She named names. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Robert Chen and Medicorp are killing people for profit." The response was explosive. Social media platforms flooded with stories from people who had lost loved ones. Hashtags like #JusticeForPatients and #MedicorpKills began trending worldwide. Protests erupted outside Medicorp facilities in multiple cities. People held signs with photos of deceased family members. But Robert Chen fought back viciously. Medicorp launched a massive PR campaign with slick videos and paid testimonials. Robert appeared on television looking concerned and reasonable. "We sympathize with Dr. Mitchell's frustration," he said smoothly. "But attacking companies like ours isn't the solution." The media split into camps. Some supported Sarah. Others defended Medicorp. Then things turned dangerous. One evening, Sarah noticed a car following her. It suddenly jumped the curb, heading straight for her. She threw herself aside, rolling onto the pavement as the car's mirror missed her head by inches. 2 days later, someone broke into Zara's apartment and spray-painted, "Stop or next time you won't be so lucky." Sarah started receiving anonymous phone calls. Sometimes silence. Sometimes threats. Her landlord evicted her. Her lawyers advised dropping the case. "Then they destroy me," Sarah said quietly. "But I won't back down." That night, Sarah recorded another video. Her face was tired, and fear showed in her eyes. But her voice was steady. "Since I started speaking out, my life has been systematically destroyed. I've been arrested. I've received death threats. Someone tried to run me over. Why? Because I'm telling the truth, and that truth threatens their profits." Her voice grew stronger. "But I won't stop. Even if they kill me. Because every day I stay silent, more people die. I'm not special. I'm just a doctor who got tired of watching good people die for bad reasons." The video was viewed millions of times within hours. The breakthrough came from investigative journalist Michael Torres, who had been investigating pharmaceutical corruption for years. He contacted Sarah through encrypted channels. "I've been gathering evidence on Medicorp for 3 years," he said. "Now, with everything that's happened to you, I have enough public interest to force my editors to publish." Michael had done incredible work. He had interviewed dozens of victims across multiple countries. He had obtained documents from regulatory agencies showing bribes. He had found scientists paid to falsify research. Most damning of all, Medicorp had deliberately created artificial insulin shortages to drive up demand. They had working insulin in warehouses but held it back from distribution, letting people die while they manipulated the market. People died not because insulin was expensive, Michael told Sarah. They died because Medicorp actively prevented them from getting medicine that existed. That's premeditated murder. Michael published his investigation in one of the world's most respected newspapers, The Price of Greed: How Medicorp's CEO Built a Fortune on Patient Deaths. The piece was devastating. It laid out everything in meticulous detail with irrefutable evidence. The falsified trials, the bribes, the artificial shortages, the thousands of preventable deaths. The public reaction was unprecedented. Protests erupted in dozens of cities across multiple countries. Thousands surrounded Medicorp facilities and government buildings. They carried photos of deceased family members. Pharmacies refused to stock Medicorp products. Doctors started a boycott. Hospitals canceled contracts. Medicorp's stock price plummeted. Board members began resigning. Politicians who had defended the industry suddenly discovered their concern for affordable healthcare. Robert called an emergency press conference to defend himself. Sarah watched from Zara's apartment as he stood before journalists looking confident. "These accusations are baseless," he declared. Medicorp has always operated within legal boundaries. Dr. Mitchell is a troubled woman who has twisted legitimate concerns into conspiracy theories. Then something unexpected happened. From the audience, an elderly woman stood up slowly. "Mr. Chen, my name is Amina Khalid. Your insulin killed my father." The room went completely silent. Every camera swung toward her. "He was a teacher for 40 years, Amina continued, tears streaming down her face. When your company raised insulin prices, he rationed his medicine. He did calculations in a notebook, trying to make 1 month's supply last 4 months. He did it so I could finish college." She held up the notebook. "He died alone in his apartment. His last words were, 'Tell Amina I love her.' This was my father. He wasn't a statistic. He was a human being who deserved to live. And you took him from me because you decided your $50 million bonus mattered more than his life." Her voice broke but she kept speaking. "How do you sleep at night? How do you look at yourself knowing you've killed thousands of people like my father?" The room was absolutely silent. Then another person stood up. "My wife died because she couldn't afford your heart medication." Another rose. "My daughter lost her vision because we had to ration her diabetes medication." One by one, people who had lost loved ones stood and shared their stories. They had coordinated this secretly. Each carried photos. Each had a story of preventable death. Robert stood frozen at the podium, his face pale, hands trembling. He tried to speak. We. But words failed him. The crowd's anger grew. "Murderer," someone shouted. Others joined in. Robert's security rushed him out through a side door. But the damage was done. The world had seen him speechless and shaking, unable to defend himself. The video went viral instantly, viewed hundreds of millions of times. The pressure became unbearable. Medicorp's stock went into free fall. Major investors demanded Robert's resignation. Board members who had supported him discovered serious concerns about his leadership. Within 48 hours, criminal investigations launched in multiple countries. Prosecutors announced they were investigating Medicorp for fraud, bribery, criminally negligent homicide, and violations of healthcare regulations. The evidence Sarah, David, and Michael had gathered was handed to prosecutors. Former employees came forward with additional testimony. Bribed officials broke their silence to save themselves. Medicorp's board held an emergency meeting. They fired Robert Chen and announced immediate changes. Insulin prices would be reduced by 70%. They would release patents for generic production. They would create a fund to compensate families. But Sarah knew this wasn't enough. She organized a massive class action lawsuit. Within weeks, thousands had joined. The legal battle would take years, but Sarah was prepared to fight. The day Robert Chen was arrested was cold and gray. Sarah stood outside the courthouse with Amina, Zara, David, Michael, and hundreds of affected families. They held photos of lost loved ones, creating a memorial wall stretching entire blocks. The charges were extensive: fraud, bribery, racketeering, criminally negligent homicide, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of international healthcare laws. If convicted, he faced life in prison. When police led Robert out in handcuffs, he looked diminished. Gone was the confident CEO. His shoulders were hunched. His face was pale and haggard. He saw Sarah in the crowd. Their eyes met. Sarah held up Khalid Ahmed's photo, making sure Robert saw it clearly. Robert looked away, shame finally breaking through his arrogance. Someone shouted, "That's what you get." But Amina raised her hand for silence. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. It's about making sure what happened to my father never happens again. Robert Chen deserves punishment. But more importantly, the system that enabled him needs to change. She turned to the cameras. Don't just celebrate his arrest. Demand better. Demand affordable healthcare. Demand that medicine is a human right. That's how we honor everyone we lost. The crowd erupted in cheers. Sarah hugged Amina tightly, tears streaming down her face. The trial took 8 months. Every day, the courtroom was packed. Sarah testified for 3 days, presenting evidence and sharing patient stories. David and other former employees testified about internal corruption. Medical experts explained how the company's policies had directly caused preventable deaths. The prosecution presented emails where Robert had personally approved price increases despite knowing people would die. They showed financial records proving he had received millions in bonuses tied to those increases. They played recordings of board meetings where executives laughed about maximizing value extraction from desperate customers. Robert's defense team claimed he was following industry standards. They argued he couldn't be held personally responsible for corporate decisions. They suggested patients who died had made poor health choices. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. The judge, an elderly woman who had lost her own sister to unaffordable medication, showed no mercy. "Mr. Chen, you had every advantage in life. You could have used your position to help people. Instead, you exploited human suffering for personal gain. You showed no compassion for thousands who died. You showed no remorse even when confronted." She looked at him with contempt. "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. All your personal assets will be seized to compensate victims. You will leave prison with nothing, just as you left thousands of families with nothing." Robert's face crumbled. For the first time, Sarah saw genuine emotion, not remorse, but fear and loss. After sentencing, Sarah addressed the media on the courthouse steps. "This verdict is important. It sends a message that wealth and power don't grant immunity. But this is just one man. The system that enabled him still exists." She looked into the cameras. Pharmaceutical companies still price medicines beyond what people can afford. Still lobby governments. Still prioritize shareholders over patients. Robert Chen is going to prison, but the fight for affordable healthcare continues. We need comprehensive reform. Price controls on essential medicines. We need to treat healthcare as a human right. We need to hold accountable not just individual executives, but the entire system that values profit over human life. The crowd applauded. Sarah felt exhausted but hopeful. They had won one battle. The war for healthcare justice continued. 6 months after Robert's sentencing, Sarah's clinic reopened in a new location, larger and better equipped, funded by worldwide donations. The compensation fund from Medicorp's seized assets provided additional resources. The first patient through the door was Maya, now a healthy 8-year-old. Her breathing was easy, inhaler always within reach thanks to new patient assistance programs. "You saved her life twice," Maya's mother said, hugging Sarah. "Once with medicine, and once by fighting for justice." Zara, now clinic manager, watched the waiting room fill. "We did it," she whispered. "We're not done yet," Sarah replied, smiling. Robert was just one man. The system still exists. People are still struggling. We've won a battle, not the war. But we proved change is possible, Zara said. We proved ordinary people can hold the powerful accountable. Throughout the day, people visited. Amina Khalid arrived in the afternoon. She had completed her degree with honors and now worked as a public health advocate. Baba would be proud, Sarah told her. Amina's eyes filled with tears. He'd be proud of you too. You gave people like us a voice. That evening, after the last patient left, Sarah sat in her office feeling content despite exhaustion. On her desk was a letter from the health ministry. New regulations required pharmaceutical companies to justify pricing. Profit margins on essential medicines would be capped. Generic alternatives would be fast-tracked. Patient assistance programs were now mandatory. It wasn't perfect. But it was progress. There was also a letter from a woman in India whose son had been diagnosed with diabetes. Because of your fight, my son can now afford his insulin. You saved his life without ever meeting him. Sarah kept that letter in her desk drawer. On hard days, she would read it and remember why she fought. 5 years later, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at an international medical conference, invited to speak about her experience and the changes it had sparked. When I started this fight, people told me I couldn't win, she began, her voice strong and clear. They told me one person couldn't change a system designed to crush people like us. But they were wrong. She gestured to the audience where survivors, activists, medical professionals, and former patients sat together. Because I wasn't one person. I was thousands. I was every patient who refused to die in silence. Every family member who demanded answers, every healthcare worker who saw injustice and said, "No more," every journalist who investigated despite threats, every lawyer who volunteered their time, every ordinary citizen who marched or shared stories on social media. Robert Chin thought he was untouchable. He thought money could buy immunity. He thought he could kill thousands and face no accountability. But he forgot something important: every empire built on suffering eventually falls. Because the people's suffering won't stay silent forever, because human dignity and human rights are more powerful than greed. Sarah's voice grew stronger, passion lighting her eyes. This isn't just about insulin prices or pharmaceutical greed. It's about recognizing that every human life has value. That a poor person's life matters just as much as a rich person's. That no amount of profit justifies letting people die. That healthcare is a human right, not a luxury. She paused, emotion catching in her throat. Khalid Ahmed didn't have to die. Maya shouldn't have struggled to breathe. The thousands we lost didn't need to become martyrs. They should be here with us, living full lives, watching their children grow, enjoying their grandchildren, contributing to their communities. We can't bring them back. But we can honor their memory by continuing to fight. By refusing to accept a world where medicine is a luxury. By holding people accountable when they choose greed over humanity. By building systems that value human life over corporate profits. Sarah held up photos, not of Robert Chin, but of all the patients she had lost. Khalid with his warm smile, the elderly woman, the young father, the grandmother. Each face told a story. Each represented a preventable tragedy. "These are the faces I think about every day," she said softly. "These are the people who gave me strength when I wanted to quit. These are the people who remind me why this fight matters. And these are the people whose memories demand we never stop pushing for change." Justice isn't just about punishment. It's not just about sending Robert Chen to prison or getting compensation. Justice is about prevention. It's about building a world where stories like theirs don't keep happening. Where no parent has to watch their child suffer because medicine costs too much. Where no elderly person has to choose between food and pills, where no one has to ration life-saving medication because the pharmaceutical industry values profits over human lives. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. Sarah barely noticed. She was looking at Amina in the front row, holding her father's photo and smiling through tears. Beside her sat Maya, now 13 and healthy, dreaming of becoming a doctor someday. That smile told Sarah everything she needed to know. They had won. Not because Robert Chen was in prison. Not because Medicorp had been dismantled. Not even because regulations had changed. They had won because people who had felt powerless now knew they had power. Because families who had suffered in silence now had voices, because the system that had seemed invincible had been proven breakable, because ordinary people had shown extraordinary courage and changed the world. After the conference, Sarah returned to her clinic in Karachi. The walls were covered with photos of patients, living patients, healthy patients, patients who had survived because medicine was now affordable. Children saved from preventable diseases. Elderly people managing chronic conditions. Young adults living full lives despite diabetes or heart disease or asthma. A new patient arrived that afternoon, a young woman with a sick baby. She looked terrified, her clothes old and patched, her feet dusty from walking. "Please, Dr. Sahiba," she said desperately. "My baby has been coughing for days. I have no money, but please." Sarah gently took the baby and began the examination. "You don't need money here. You just need to trust me to help your baby." As Sarah listened to the infant's lungs and prepared medicine, she thought about how far they had come. Khalid Ahmed's death had sparked a movement. His sacrifice, and the sacrifices of thousands like him, had finally forced society to confront its cruelty. But Sarah also knew the fight would never truly be over. There would always be people who valued profit over human life. There would always be new Robert Chens rising up, finding new ways to exploit the vulnerable. The system would always push back against reform. That's why every generation needed people willing to stand up and fight. Every generation needed people who would refuse to accept injustice. Every generation needed people who valued human dignity more than personal comfort. As Sarah handed the mother medicine and watched her face transform from despair to hope, she felt the weight of that responsibility. But she also felt the strength that came from knowing she wasn't alone. Around the world, inspired by what had happened in Karachi, patients and healthcare workers were organizing. Fighting for affordable medicine, demanding accountability from pharmaceutical companies. Building networks of support and resistance. The movement Sarah had started had spread far beyond her small clinic. It had become something bigger than any one person. It had become a global fight for human dignity and healthcare justice. And that fight would continue. Through victories and setbacks, through hope and despair. Through the courage of ordinary people who refused to accept that greed should triumph over compassion. Sarah looked at the mother holding her baby, both of them safe now. This was why she fought. Not for glory or recognition. Not even for revenge against Robert Chen. She fought because every human life had value. Because everyone deserved dignity and healthcare and hope. Because the world could be better than it was, if only people were brave enough to demand change and work to make it happen. That was the real victory. Not a court verdict or a prison sentence. But the knowledge that the arc of history, though long, does bend toward justice, as long as there are people willing to pull it in that direction. And Sarah Mitchell, along with thousands inspired by her courage, would keep pulling for the rest of her life. Because that's what justice demanded. Because that's what human dignity required. And because somewhere, in the memory of a kind teacher named Khalid Ahmed who had valued his daughter's future more than his own life, the fight for a better world continued. One patient at a time. One voice at a time. One act of courage at a time. Until the day when no one would have to choose between medicine and food. Until the day when healthcare was truly treated as a human right. Until the day when people like Robert Chen could no longer profit from human suffering. That day hadn't arrived yet. But because of Sarah Mitchell and thousands like her, it was closer than it had ever been before. And that gave her hope. That gave her strength. That gave her reason to wake up each morning and continue the fight. For Khalid. For Maya. For every patient who had ever walked through her clinic doors. For every person who deserved better than a system that valued money over human life. The silent scream had finally been heard. And it had changed everything.